Imagine walking into a psychiatric hospital voluntarily, telling a single brief lie, and finding out you cannot leave. In 1969, a brilliant 39-year-old psychologist from Stanford University named David Rosenhan devised what would become one of the most famous, debated, and controversial experiments in the history of medicine. He wanted to answer a fundamental question that strikes at the very heart of human perception and medical authority. If a completely sane person is placed inside a psychiatric institution, can the doctors tell that they do not belong there? Or does the label of mental illness color everything a person says, does, and feels? What Rosenhan uncovered shook the foundations of American psychiatry, ignited a fiery ideological war, and led to a dramatic institutional collapse. But decades later, explosive new evidence emerged that questioned whether the entire experiment was a brilliant exposure of institutional blind spots, or one of the greatest scientific frauds ever committed. This is the story of the Rosenhan experiment, the sane people trapped inside insane places, and the shocking truth behind the research that changed psychiatry forever. To understand why David Rosenhan launched this audacious study, we have to travel back to the late 1960s and early 1970s. Thinkers like Thomas Szasz argued that mental illness was largely a social construct used to enforce conformity, while popular culture, exemplified by Ken Kesey's 1962 novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, depicted mental institutions as oppressive prisons designed to break the human spirit. David Rosenhan, a charismatic and ambitious professor of psychology and law at Stanford University, wanted empirical proof. He believed that psychiatric diagnosis was fundamentally flawed because it resided in the minds of the observers rather than in the patients themselves. He decided that the only way to test whether psychiatric staff could truly distinguish sanity from insanity was to send healthy covert undercover researchers into the belly of the beast. The experiment officially began in 1969 and unfolded across 3 grueling years. Rosenhan assembled a group of 8 pseudo-patients, including 3 psychologists, a pediatrician, a psychiatrist, a painter, a housewife, and Rosenhan himself. They targeted 12 different psychiatric hospitals located across 5 states on both the east and west coasts of the United States. The institutions ranged from old, underfunded public facilities to modern, elite private clinics. The rules of the experiment were simple and strict. Each pseudo-patient scheduled an appointment at a hospital, claiming they were hearing a faint, unfamiliar voice of their own gender saying 3 specific words: empty, hollow, and thud. Beyond this single fabricated symptom, every pseudo-patient was instructed to give entirely truthful details about their personal life, relationships, employment history, and past health. The moment they were admitted to the psychiatric ward, they were instructed to immediately cease claiming any symptoms whatsoever. They were to act completely normal, speak calmly, interact pleasantly with staff and other patients, and insist that the voices were entirely gone. Their goal was simple: get discharged by convincing the medical staff they were sane. What happened next was terrifying. Not a single staff member realized these individuals were healthy imposters. Every single pseudo-patient was admitted, and 11 out of 12 were diagnosed with severe schizophrenia, while 1 was diagnosed with manic depressive psychosis. To get out, they had to accept their diagnosis, feign compliance, and ingest heavy antipsychotic medications, which they secretly flushed down toilets or hid in their cheeks. The staff interpreted normal human behavior through the lens of mental illness. When pseudo-patients took detailed notes about their surroundings, nurses wrote in their charts that the patient engaged in obsessive writing behavior. When a patient walked up and down the hallway out of sheer boredom, it was documented as severe pacing and anxiety. Interestingly, while the doctors and nurses were completely blind to the truth, the real patients were not. Fellow inmates frequently confronted the researchers, saying things like, "You are not crazy, you are a journalist or a professor, you are checking up on the hospital." The pseudo-patients stayed trapped inside for an average of 19 days. The shortest stay was 7 days, while the longest stretched to an agonizing 52 days. Every single pseudo-patient was eventually discharged not as cured, but with the diagnosis of schizophrenia in remission. When Rosenhan published his groundbreaking paper titled On Being Sane in Insane Places in the prestigious journal Science in January 1973, it caused an absolute earthquake. Psychiatrists were outraged, but the public was fascinated. Shortly after publication, the chief of a prestigious teaching hospital challenged Rosenhan, claiming his staff would never fall for such a trick. Rosenhan agreed to a second experiment.
He informed the hospital that over the next 3 months, one or more fake patients would attempt to gain admission. The hospital staff meticulously scrutinized every single incoming patient.
Out of 193 admissions over those 3 months, the staff identified 41 patients as high-confidence imposters, with another 23 flagged as suspected fakes. Then Rosenhan dropped the ultimate trap: he had actually sent 0 fake patients. The hospital had turned away or falsely flagged scores of genuinely sick individuals in their attempt to catch invisible actors. For decades, the Rosenhan experiment stood as an indisputable masterpiece of scientific skepticism. It directly led to the total overhaul of psychiatric diagnostic tools, forcing the creation of the DSM-3 in 1980, which instituted strict, objective checklist criteria for mental health conditions.
However, the story did not end there.
In recent years, investigative journalist Susannah Cahalan set out to write a book about Rosenhan, titled The Great Pretender, published in 2019. What she discovered shattered the legendary myth. Cahalan gained access to Rosenhan's private notes, drafts, and recorded interviews after his death in 2012. Upon scrutinizing the raw archives, she uncovered massive inconsistencies, missing files, and potential evidence of deliberate data fabrication. First, out of the 9 original pseudo-patients, it turned out there were actually 9, not 8. Rosenhan completely excluded the 9th participant, a man named Harry Lando.
Why was Lando erased from the famous study? Because Lando's experience at Haverford State Hospital was overwhelmingly positive.
Lando felt the staff was deeply empathetic, the treatment was genuinely helpful, and his stay was immensely therapeutic. Since Lando's positive testimony contradicted Rosenhan's harsh anti-psychiatry narrative, Rosenhan cut him out of the paper entirely. Furthermore, medical records retrieved from Rosenhan's own psychiatric admission at Haverford revealed that he did not simply report hearing the words empty, hollow, and thud. Medical records show he told admitting physicians that he had been hearing voices for months, felt suicidal, put copper wire in his ears to block the sound, and was unable to function. If a patient presents with severe suicidal ideation and auditory hallucinations lasting for months, any competent physician is obligated to admit them for safety.
Critics also point out the inherent flaw in the logic of the study. As psychiatrist Robert Spitzer famously noted, if a person drinks a gallon of blood and vomits in an emergency room, the doctor will diagnose internal bleeding. That isn't a failure of medicine, it is a doctor trusting a patient's reported symptoms. When someone claims to hear voices, doctors must err on the side of caution.
Today, the legacy of David Rosenhan remains complex and deeply contested.
Was he a visionary whistleblower who exposed institutional dehumanization, or was he an ideological advocate who manipulated data to humiliate an entire medical discipline? The true answer likely lies somewhere in the middle. While his methodology was severely compromised and his reporting selective, Rosenhan undoubtedly exposed real vulnerabilities in how society categorizes human suffering. Psychiatric institutions in the mid-20th century were often neglectful, over-medicated places where human individuality was stripped away behind locked doors. His work catalyzed a vital movement toward standardized diagnostic criteria, ensuring that patients could no longer be labeled arbitrarily. Yet, the pendulum swing triggered by his study also contributed to widespread deinstitutionalization, leaving millions without adequate mental health care. Ultimately, the experiment serves as a permanent caution against diagnostic bias. It reminds us how easily human beings, even highly educated professionals, fall victim to confirmation bias when judging the minds of others. What do you think? Was David Rosenhan a heroic reformer or a flawed scientist? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into psychology history, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories.
Thanks for watching.